Everyone thinks the hard part is making money. They're wrong. Everyone thinks the hard part is losing weight, building a business, escaping poverty, becoming someone different from who they were born as. They're wrong about that too. The hard part, the genuinely, brutally, statistically difficult part, is not achieving the goal. The hard part is keeping your mouth shut about it while you do. That sounds absurd. It sounds like the kind of thing a contrarian says to sound smart at dinner parties. But stay with me, because what I'm about to show you isn't philosophy. It isn't self-help wisdom recycled from a podcast. It's physics. It's neuroscience. It's the cold, indifferent mathematics of how human brains process reward. And why the moment you announce your ambitions to the world, you have already, in a measurable and documented way, begun to destroy them. We live in an era that has weaponized visibility. Social media didn't invent the human need for social approval. That need is approximately 200,000 years old and carved into the deepest architecture of your nervous system. But social media gave that ancient primal hunger an all-you-can-eat buffet and a dopamine delivery mechanism so efficient it makes cocaine look like decaf coffee. The result is a civilization of people who are extraordinarily good at performing ambition and extraordinarily bad at executing it. You know these people. You might be one of them. The person who posts about their new diet on day one. The entrepreneur who announces their startup before writing a single line of code. The aspiring writer who tells everyone at the party about the novel they're working on. The investor who shares their portfolio strategy in a Facebook group before the first trade clears. These people are not lazy. They are not stupid. They are not lacking in desire or intelligence or even work ethic. They are simply operating with a fundamental misunderstanding of how the brain processes achievement. And that misunderstanding is costing them everything. The real question was never, how do I achieve my goals? The real question, the one nobody is asking, is this: how do I protect my goals from the part of my brain that would rather feel successful than become successful? That distinction between feeling and becoming is the entire game. And almost nobody is playing it correctly. Let's start with physics, because physics doesn't care about your feelings. In orbital mechanics, there is a concept called escape velocity. It is the minimum speed an object must reach to break free from a gravitational field without any additional propulsion. For Earth, that number is approximately 11.2 kilometers per second. Below that threshold, it doesn't matter how hard you try, how much fuel you burn, how determined you are. Gravity wins. You come back down every single time. Now, here is the thing about escape velocity that most people miss. It is not a linear problem. You cannot solve it by working a little harder. You cannot solve it by being slightly more disciplined. The relationship between effort and outcome is not a straight line. It is a threshold function. Below the threshold, all effort is essentially wasted in the long run. Above the threshold, you escape. The difference between 11.1 kilometers per second and 11.2 kilometers per second is not 0.1 kilometers per second. It is the difference between orbit and escape, between trapped and free. Your financial life, your career trajectory, your personal transformation, these all operate under the same physics. There is a gravitational field pulling you back toward your current state. Physicists call it inertia. Sociologists call it path dependency. Psychologists call it behavioral homeostasis. Your grandmother called it, that's just how things are. Whatever you call it, the force is real, it is powerful, and it does not negotiate. The problem with announcing your goals publicly is that it bleeds velocity. Every time you tell someone about your plan, every time you post about your progress, every time you accept congratulations for something you haven't yet done, you are venting propellant. You are releasing the pressure that was supposed to drive you forward. You feel the acceleration. The dopamine hit is real. The social warmth is real. The sense of forward motion is real. But you are not actually moving. You are burning fuel while standing still. And here is the cruel mathematics of it. The gravitational field doesn't care that you felt good. It doesn't reduce its pull because you had a nice moment on Instagram. It keeps pulling, constant and indifferent, while your tank gets emptier with every post, every announcement, every conversation where someone says, "Wow, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you." The people who escape, the ones who actually cross the threshold, are almost universally the ones who learn to hoard their velocity. They kept their plans quiet. They moved in silence. Not because silence is romantic or mysterious, but because silence is efficient. Because every unit of motivational energy that doesn't get spent on social performance gets spent on actual progress instead. This is not a metaphor. This is not an analogy. This is the literal, documented, experimentally verified mechanism by which human motivation operates. And understanding it changes everything. Before we go deeper into the neuroscience, we need to talk about the tax. There is a concept in economics sometimes called the poverty premium, the well-documented phenomenon by which being poor is, paradoxically, more expensive than being wealthy. Terry Pratchett articulated it most memorably through his character Sam Vimes, a policeman who observed that a rich man could buy a pair of boots for $50 that would last 10 years, while a poor man could only afford boots for $10 that would fall apart in a year. Over 10 years, the poor man spent $100 on boots and still had wet feet. The rich man spent $50 and stayed dry. This is not a metaphor about boots. It is a description of how compounding disadvantage works at every level of the economic system. High-interest payday loans versus low-interest bank credit. Buying in small quantities at convenience stores versus buying in bulk at wholesale prices. Renting appliances versus owning them. Paying late fees because you couldn't pay on time versus never paying late fees because you had a buffer. At every single point of transaction, the person with fewer resources pays more per unit of value received. The observer effect, the phenomenon of publicly announcing your goals, operates on exactly the same principle. It is a tax on ambition. And like all regressive taxes, it hits hardest the people who can least afford it. Here is how the math works. A person with deep financial reserves, an established network, and a track record of success can afford to announce their goals publicly. If they fail to follow through, the social cost is manageable. Their identity is not primarily defined by this one goal. They have other achievements to fall back on. The announcement itself may even serve a strategic purpose, attracting partners, investors, talent. For them, public commitment can function as a forcing mechanism, a way of burning the boats. But for the person who is just starting out, the person trying to escape their current circumstances, build something from nothing, transform themselves without a safety net, the calculus is completely different. They have no buffer. Every unit of motivational energy matters. Every drop of psychological fuel is precious. And the social approval they receive from announcing their goals is not a bonus on top of their progress. It is a substitute for it. The brain, as we will see in a moment, cannot reliably tell the difference. The tax compounds. You announce the goal, you get the approval. Your brain registers partial completion of the achievement cycle. Your motivation decreases. You make less progress. You feel the gap between your announcement and your reality. You experience shame and anxiety. You either double down on performance, more posts, more announcements, more social signaling, or you quietly abandon the goal and tell yourself you'll start again next month. Meanwhile, the person who said nothing is 3 months into actual execution. They have made mistakes nobody saw. They have iterated without public scrutiny. They have built momentum in the dark, where momentum is cheapest to build and easiest to sustain. The gap between these two people is not talent. It is not intelligence. It is not even discipline in the conventional sense. It is information management. One person understood that their goal was a resource to be protected. The other person treated it like a product to be marketed. One of them is building something. The other is building a brand around something they haven't built yet. Now we need to talk about what is actually happening inside your skull when you tell someone about your plans. The human brain is, at its core, a prediction and reward machine. It evolved not to experience reality accurately, but to model reality efficiently. To predict what actions will lead to survival and reproduction, and to motivate those actions through the release of neurochemicals. Dopamine, the molecule most associated with motivation and reward, is not actually released in response to getting what you want. It is released in response to the anticipation of getting what you want, and in response to signals that suggest you are on track to get it. This is a crucial distinction. Dopamine is a progress signal, not a completion signal. It fires when you see evidence that you are moving toward a goal. And here is the problem. Your brain cannot reliably distinguish between actual progress toward a goal and social signals that suggest you are making progress. When you tell someone about your plan to start a business, and they respond with enthusiasm and encouragement, your brain receives a social reward signal. Status has been conferred. Approval has been granted. The tribe has acknowledged your ambition. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is meaningful information. It suggests that your plan has social validity, that the group supports your direction, that you are not going to be ostracized for your ambitions. And your brain, operating on ancient hardware that was never designed for the modern information environment, interprets this social reward as partial goal completion. The research on this is not ambiguous. In a series of studies conducted by Peter Gallwitzer and his colleagues at New York University, participants who shared their intentions with others were significantly less likely to follow through on those intentions than participants who kept them private. The mechanism was clear. The social acknowledgement created what Gallwitzer called premature cognitive closure, the brain's tendency to treat a goal as partially achieved once it has been socially recognized. You told people you were going to write a novel. They said, "That's amazing. You should definitely do that." Your brain logged. Social validation received, goal acknowledged, partial reward dispensed. The urgency decreased, the hunger diminished. Not completely. You still want to write the novel, but the edge is gone. The desperate, driving, slightly uncomfortable pressure that was going to force you to sit down and actually do the work has been partially relieved by a conversation at a dinner party. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. This is your brain working exactly as designed, in an environment it was never designed for. The stress response compounds the problem. When you announce a goal publicly, you create a social contract. You have now told people what you intend to do, which means they will notice if you don't do it. This activates a low-grade but persistent stress response, the cortisol drip of social accountability. And cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is cognitively expensive. Chronic low-level cortisol elevation impairs prefrontal cortex function, the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and complex decision-making. Research from Princeton University, published in the journal Science, demonstrated that financial stress alone, the cognitive burden of worrying about money, reduces effective IQ by approximately 13 points. That is the equivalent of losing a full night of sleep, every night, indefinitely. The mechanism is not unique to financial stress. Any persistent cognitive load that occupies working memory produces similar effects. The anxiety of public commitment, the constant background awareness that people are watching, that you have made promises, that your identity is now tied to an outcome you haven't yet achieved, is exactly this kind of cognitive tax. You announced your goal to reduce your cognitive load through social support. Instead, you increased it. You traded the clean, private pressure of personal ambition for the messy, public pressure of social expectation. And in doing so, you made yourself measurably less capable of achieving the very thing you announced. The brain, under this kind of stress, does what brains under stress always do. It seeks relief. It looks for dopamine. It looks for the fastest available path to feeling better. And in the modern world, the fastest available path to feeling better is almost always the same path that got you into trouble in the first place. More social performance. Another post. Another conversation. Another announcement. Another hit of approval. This is the loop. This is the trap. This is the mechanism by which perfectly intelligent, genuinely ambitious people spend years performing ambition without ever actually executing it. They are not procrastinating in the conventional sense. They are not lazy. They are addicted, not to failure, but to the feeling of being on the way to success. And social media has made that feeling available on demand, 24 hours a day, at zero cost, with no requirement that you actually do anything. The dopamine hit from 100 likes on your Starting My Fitness Journey post is real. It is neurochemically indistinguishable from the dopamine hit you would get from actually completing a workout. Your brain doesn't know the difference. Your body doesn't know the difference. Only the outcome knows the difference. And the outcome doesn't care about your feelings. There is a concept in behavioral economics called substitution. It describes the tendency of the human mind to replace a difficult goal with an easier proxy that feels similar. You want to be healthy, so you buy expensive gym clothes instead of going to the gym. You want to be educated, so you buy books and arrange them on a shelf instead of reading them. You want to be financially free, so you follow finance influencers on social media instead of changing your actual financial behavior. The substitution is not random. It is always in the direction of lower effort and higher immediate reward. And it is almost always invisible to the person doing it. Nobody thinks, I am going to substitute the hard thing for the easy thing that feels like the hard thing. They think, I am taking a first step. They think I am building momentum. They think I am getting inspired. Public announcement of goals is the most powerful substitution mechanism in the modern world. It is the master key that unlocks the substitution trap for virtually every type of goal. Because the social performance of ambition, the announcement, the post, the conversation, the identity construction, is always easier than the actual work, always more immediately rewarding, and always feels, in the moment, like genuine progress. The wealthy person and the person trying to become wealthy respond to this trap differently. Not because wealthy people are more virtuous or more disciplined in some abstract sense, but because wealthy people have, through experience or education or luck, learned to distinguish between the feeling of progress and actual progress. They have developed what we might call outcome orientation, a cognitive habit of evaluating actions not by how they feel, but by what they produce. The person trapped in the substitution loop is experience-oriented. They evaluate actions by how they feel. Announcing the goal feels like progress, so it registers as progress. Buying the gym clothes feels like commitment, so it registers as commitment. Following the finance influencer feels like financial education, so it registers as financial education. The person who escapes the loop has learned, often through painful experience, that feelings are not outcomes, that the map is not the territory, that the performance of ambition and the execution of ambition are not just different things, but often actively opposed to each other, because they compete for the same limited resource, motivational energy. This is the real poverty premium of public goal setting. You are spending your most valuable currency, the psychological fuel that drives actual behavior change, on a product that feels like progress, but produces none. And like all regressive taxes, you pay it most heavily when you can least afford it, at the beginning, when your reserves are lowest, when the goal is most fragile, when the gap between where you are and where you want to be is widest and most discouraging. So what does the escape look like? What does it actually mean to protect your goals from the observer effect? The first move is the hardest because it requires you to do something that feels deeply unnatural in the current cultural environment. It requires you to become temporarily invisible, not permanently. Not forever. Not as a lifestyle or an identity, but as a strategic posture during the most critical phase of any transformation, the beginning. The beginning is when you are most vulnerable. Your new habits are not yet automatic. Your new identity is not yet established. Your new skills are not yet proven. You are operating on willpower and intention, which are the most depleted and unreliable resources in the human psychological toolkit. This is precisely the moment when social performance is most tempting, because you have nothing else to show yet, and the hunger for validation is at its peak, and precisely the moment when it is most destructive. Think of it like a seedling. A seed planted in good soil, given water and light, will grow. But a seedling in its first weeks is extraordinarily fragile. The same wind that a mature tree barely notices can destroy a seedling. The same foot traffic that a mature lawn absorbs without damage can kill a new planting. The solution is not to give up on the plant. The solution is to protect it during the period of maximum vulnerability, and then step back once it has developed enough root structure to survive on its own. Your goals are the same. In the early stages, they need protection from the social environment, not because the social environment is malicious, but because it is indifferent. The people who respond to your announcements with enthusiasm are not trying to undermine you. They are just doing what humans do, responding to social signals with social signals. The damage is not intentional. It is structural. It is the inevitable result of running ancient social software in a modern information environment. The practice of radical silence around your goals is not about secrecy for its own sake. It is about energy management. Every conversation you don't have about your goal is a conversation whose energy goes into the goal instead. Every post you don't make is a dopamine hit you don't spend. Every moment of social performance you skip is a moment of actual execution you can have instead. This is what some of the most effective people in the world have figured out, often without being able to articulate it explicitly. They work in silence. They announce results, not intentions. They let the work speak, and they let it speak only after it is done. Not because they are antisocial or secretive by nature, but because they have learned through experience that the announcement is the enemy of the achievement. The discipline required here is not the discipline of working harder. It is the discipline of not performing. And in a culture that has made performance the primary currency of identity, that is genuinely one of the hardest things a person can do. The second move is about building what strategists sometimes call a moat, a sustainable competitive advantage that is difficult to replicate and difficult to attack. In the context of personal transformation, the moat is not a single skill. A single skill is a commodity. There are millions of people who can code, millions who can write, millions who can sell, millions who can manage. A single skill, no matter how well developed, puts you in direct competition with everyone else who has that skill. And in a global economy, that competition is brutal, and the wages it produces are, for most people, insufficient for genuine financial independence. The moat is a combination. It is the intersection of 2 or 3 skills that individually are common, but together, in your specific configuration, are rare. Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, articulated this principle clearly. He was not the funniest person in the world, not the best artist in the world, and not the deepest thinker about corporate culture in the world. But the combination of those 3 things in one person was unique enough to build something that nobody else could replicate. The reason this connects to the observer effect is subtle but important. Building a moat requires a long period of investment in skills that don't yet produce visible results. You are learning things that don't yet pay. You are developing capabilities that don't yet have an audience. You are doing work that, if you announced it, would produce confusion or skepticism rather than admiration. I'm learning to code produces social approval. I'm learning to code while also studying behavioral economics and developing a writing practice so that in 3 years, I can build products that explain complex financial concepts to non-technical audiences, produces blank stares. The second strategy is vastly more powerful, but it is also vastly less socially rewarding in the short term, which means it requires you to be comfortable operating without social fuel for an extended period. This is where the silence becomes not just a tactic, but a philosophy. The person building a moat has to be willing to look for a period of time like they are doing nothing, or doing something strange, or doing something that doesn't make sense to the people around them. They have to be comfortable with the social discomfort of being misunderstood, because the alternative, explaining themselves, justifying their choices, seeking validation for their strategy, is the thing that will kill the strategy. Every time you explain your long-term plan to someone who doesn't understand it, you are not educating them. You are auditing yourself. You are submitting your vision to a review process conducted by people who do not have the context, the information, or the long-term orientation to evaluate it accurately. And when they respond with skepticism, as they often will because skepticism is the default response to anything unfamiliar, you have two choices: defend your plan, which costs energy and creates conflict, or update your plan based on their feedback, which may or may not be valid but will almost certainly push you toward more conventional, more socially legible, less differentiated choices. Neither option serves you. The first drains you. The second dilutes you. The only winning move is not to play, to keep the plan private until it has produced results that speak for themselves. The third move is about your environment, and it is the one that most people find most uncomfortable to confront honestly. There is a phenomenon in social dynamics sometimes called the crab bucket effect. If you put a single crab in a bucket, it will climb out. If you put multiple crabs in a bucket, none of them will escape, because every time one crab gets close to the top, the others will pull it back down. Not out of malice, not out of conscious sabotage, simply because that is what crabs do when they are in a bucket together. Human social groups operate on similar dynamics, not always and not in every context, but with sufficient frequency and sufficient force that it constitutes one of the primary mechanisms by which people remain trapped in circumstances they want to escape. The people around you, your family, your friends, your colleagues, your community, have a vested interest in your remaining recognizable to them. This is not a conspiracy. It is not even conscious. It is the natural operation of social homeostasis, the tendency of social systems to resist change in their members, because change in one member creates pressure on all the others to change or to justify not changing. When you announce that you are going to start a business, your friends who have not started businesses are confronted with a choice: support your ambition, which implicitly challenges their own inaction, or find reasons why your plan won't work, which relieves the pressure. Most people, most of the time, will choose the second option. Not because they are bad people, because they are human beings operating under the same cognitive pressures as everyone else. The result is that your announcement, made in good faith, seeking support and encouragement, produces a social environment that is subtly but persistently hostile to your success. The skepticism is framed as concern. The discouragement is framed as realism. The resistance is framed as love. And because it comes from people you trust, people who genuinely care about you in other contexts, it is far more damaging than open opposition would be. Open opposition you can fight. Loving skepticism from people you respect is much harder to resist. It gets inside. It plants doubt. It makes you question whether your plan is actually as good as you thought, whether you are being naive, whether the people who have known you your whole life might be seeing something you can't see. Sometimes they are. But more often they are simply reflecting their own limitations back at you through the lens of concern for your well-being. And the only reliable way to protect yourself from this dynamic is to not give it a target. Keep the plan private. Let the results speak. By the time the results are visible, the social environment has already been changed by them. And the people who would have discouraged you at the beginning are often the first to celebrate you at the end. The alternative to a supportive physical environment is a curated intellectual environment. This is the practice of replacing the social fuel you are no longer getting from announcing your goals with a different kind of fuel: the ideas, frameworks, and examples of people who have already done what you are trying to do. Books, lectures, interviews, biographies. The recorded thinking of people who have navigated the same terrain you're navigating, made the same mistakes you're about to make, and found their way through. This is not inspiration in the soft, motivational poster sense. This is intelligence transfer. It is the closest thing available to having a mentor who has already solved your problem. And unlike a human mentor, it is available at any time, at minimal cost, and without the social dynamics that make human mentorship complicated. The person who replaces their social media feed with a reading list is not becoming antisocial. They are becoming strategic about where their attention goes. They are choosing to spend their limited cognitive bandwidth on inputs that increase their capability rather than inputs that increase their social visibility. Over time, this compounds. The person who reads seriously for 2 years, while their peers scroll seriously for 2 years, has not just learned more. They have developed a fundamentally different cognitive architecture, different mental models, different frameworks for decision-making, different tolerance for complexity and ambiguity. This is the moat being built in real time. Not through a single dramatic decision, but through thousands of small choices about where attention goes. And it is built in silence, because the moment you start performing your intellectual development, posting about the books you're reading, sharing quotes, building an identity around being someone who reads, you have re-entered the substitution trap. You are performing growth instead of experiencing it. The fourth move is the one that changes the mathematics permanently, and it is the one that requires the most patience to reach. Everything we have discussed so far, the silence, the moat, the environmental management, is preparation for this. It is the work of getting yourself to the threshold. But the threshold itself is a specific kind of transition. The transition from selling your time to owning assets that generate value without your continuous presence. This is not a new idea. Every serious thinker about wealth and financial independence has articulated some version of it. But it is worth examining through the lens of the observer effect, because the connection is not obvious. The person who announces their financial goals publicly is, almost always, announcing goals that are fundamentally about income, about earning more, spending less, saving more. These are not bad goals. They are necessary goals. But they are goals that operate within the existing mathematical structure of the system, and that structure is designed to keep most people exactly where they are. The mathematical structure is this. When you sell your time, your income is capped by the number of hours you can work and the rate per hour the market will pay for your specific skills. Both of these are finite. There are only 24 hours in a day, and the market rate for most skills, while it can be increased through education and experience, is ultimately bounded by supply and demand. Working harder within this structure produces linear results at best, and the returns diminish as you approach the physical limits of what a human body can sustain. Assets work differently. An asset, a business, a piece of intellectual property, a financial instrument, a rental property, generates value through a mechanism that is not directly tied to your time. It can work while you sleep. It can scale without proportional increases in your effort. And crucially, it can compound. The returns it generates can be reinvested to generate more returns, which can be reinvested to generate more returns, in a process that, given sufficient time, produces results that are not just larger than linear effort would produce, but categorically different in kind. The transition from time seller to asset owner is the real escape velocity. It is the threshold above which the mathematics of the system begins to work for you rather than against you. And it is the transition that the observer effect most reliably prevents people from making. Here is why. The transition requires a period of apparent sacrifice. You must divert resources, time, money, attention, from immediate consumption toward asset building. You must accept a lower standard of living in the present in exchange for a fundamentally different mathematical position in the future. You must do work that does not produce immediate, visible, socially legible results. This is precisely the kind of work that is hardest to sustain without social support. And it is precisely the kind of work that social performance most effectively undermines. Because the moment you announce, "I am building an asset," you have created a social expectation of visible progress. And asset building, in its early stages, is almost entirely invisible. The code being written, the audience being built, the skills being developed, the capital being accumulated. None of this looks like success from the outside. It looks like nothing. Or it looks like sacrifice. Or it looks like the kind of thing that people who are not being realistic do. The social pressure to abandon the asset building phase and return to the more legible, more immediately rewarding activity of income earning is enormous. And it is pressure that you have created for yourself by announcing your intentions. The silence is not just about protecting your motivation. It is about protecting the time horizon that asset building requires. It is about giving yourself permission to look like you are doing nothing for long enough that you are actually building something. The person who keeps their financial strategy private can sustain the asset building phase indefinitely. because they are not accountable to anyone's timeline but their own. The person who has announced their strategy is accountable to the social contract they created. And that contract, written by people who do not understand the mathematics of compounding, will almost always demand results on a timeline that is incompatible with how assets actually grow. There is a final dimension to this that we have not yet addressed, and it is perhaps the most important one. The observer effect does not just affect your motivation and your energy. It affects your identity. And identity, it turns out, is the deepest and most powerful determinant of behavior. More powerful than motivation, more powerful than discipline, more powerful than any external incentive or accountability structure. When you announce a goal publicly, you are not just sharing information. You are constructing an identity. You are telling the world, and more importantly, telling yourself, who you are in relation to this goal. I am someone who is starting a business. I am someone who is getting fit. I am someone who is building wealth. These identity statements feel empowering. They feel like commitment. They feel like the kind of bold self-declaration that motivational speakers tell you to make. But they contain a hidden trap. They tie your identity to a process rather than an outcome. And they make that identity dependent on social recognition rather than internal reality. The person who says, I am building a business, and receives social validation for that statement, has now created an identity that is partially constituted by the social recognition. The identity is real. It exists in the minds of the people who heard the statement and responded to it. But it is fragile because it is not yet grounded in actual achievement. It is a promissory note, not a deed. And here is the problem with promissory identities. They are extraordinarily difficult to update. Once you have told people who you are, changing that story, especially in the direction of actually, I didn't do the thing I said I was going to do, is one of the most psychologically painful experiences available to a human being. The threat to identity is processed by the brain as a threat to survival. The same neural circuits that respond to physical danger respond to identity threat. The cortisol spikes. The fight or flight response activates. The prefrontal cortex goes offline. This is why people persist in failing strategies long after the evidence has made clear that the strategy is failing. Not because they are stupid, not because they lack information, but because abandoning the strategy means abandoning the identity. And abandoning the identity means facing the social consequences of having been wrong in public. The brain will do almost anything to avoid that experience, including continuing to invest in a losing position, continuing to perform an identity that no longer corresponds to any underlying reality, continuing to announce progress that isn't happening. The person who kept their goal private has none of this problem. They have no public identity to protect. They have no social contract to honor. They have no audience to disappoint. They can update their strategy freely, pivot without shame, fail quietly, and learn from the failure without the cognitive overhead of managing other people's perceptions of their failure. This freedom, the freedom to fail privately, to iterate without an audience, to update your identity without social cost, is one of the most underrated advantages available to anyone pursuing a significant goal. And it is available to everyone at zero cost right now. The only requirement is the willingness to resist the cultural pressure to perform your ambitions rather than execute them. The cage is open. It has always been open. The bars are not made of steel. They are made of dopamine and cortisol, and the ancient, powerful, deeply human need to be seen and recognized by the people around you. They are made of the social architecture of a species that evolved in small groups where reputation was survival, and that now lives in a world where reputation can be manufactured at industrial scale without any underlying substance. The gravitational field is real. The forces pulling you back toward your current state, the social homeostasis, the cognitive biases, the neurochemical reward loops, the loving skepticism of people who care about you, are real and powerful, and not to be underestimated. But escape velocity is achievable, not through heroic effort, not through superhuman discipline, through something much simpler and much harder. The decision to stop performing your ambitions and start executing them. The decision to let your goals be private property rather than public currency. The decision to measure your progress by outcomes rather than by the social response to your announcements. The people who have made it, who have crossed the threshold, who have built the assets, who have escaped the gravitational field of their original circumstances, are not, for the most part, the loudest people in the room. They are not the ones with the most followers, or the most impressive LinkedIn profiles, or the most articulate vision statements. They are the ones who went quiet for a while, who disappeared from the social performance circuit, who stopped announcing and started building. And then, one day, the results appeared. Not as an announcement, as a fact. Undeniable, unambiguous, requiring no social validation because the evidence was self-evident. That is the only announcement worth making. Not, I am going to do this, but I did this. Everything between those two statements is private. Everything between those two statements is sacred. Everything between those two statements is the actual work. The invisible, unglamorous, socially unrewarded, mathematically compounding work of becoming someone different from who you were. Protected accordingly. The physics doesn't care about your posts. The mathematics doesn't care about your followers. The compound interest doesn't care about your personal brand. They only care about what you actually do in the silence when nobody is watching. That is where the real work happens. That is where you either escape or you don't. Choose accordingly.